Alrighty, hello everyone. This week Parshas told us there are some fantastic chidushim, and hopefully we can be masbir the chidushim well and come out with a very important decidistic idea for what's going on in the parsha. So obviously the parsha starts off Elu Tadis Yitzchak ben Avraham Hadis Yitzchak. So um, right off the bat, the person really has to ask the kasha because the way you have it is that there seems to be a break. It's very interesting that there seems to be a break between the storytelling of the Avos' period with Chai Sarah, and then after it tells Avram's story, so then it skips over Yitzchak and then tells Sarah's story, and then in Todos it goes to Yitzchak, but before even telling you about Yitzchak's life, it's emphasizing the fact that he has Todos. So that itself is a kasha. In other words, you have Eotos Yitzchak and it says Yaakov Esav Amorim Beparsha. Rashi says right here, right? So and then after this, you keep on reading. So it says this whole story, and then the Esav sold the Bukhar, and then it says Ve'ira Ba'aretz, and then you have Yitzchak's life story. So it's very schwer. Why would it first put? Why would the parsha start off with the Torahs of Yitzchak, and then it go to his life story? If you're talking about a person, you tell me about his life, and you say, and his kids were such and such. Like if you look someone up on Wikipedia, it always says this was his life, his biography, his accomplishments, and these were his kids. Right? So the parsha should be the same way. Why is it first saying it's starting off the parsha calling it Toldos and saying these are Toldos of Yitzchak, and then only after that it goes to his life. Okay, that's one kasha. Now you have another Rashi here. Rashi says, Hakasav Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham Hoyes Yitzchak. So since the pasuk wrote, because Rashi's bothered, there's double lashon. It's Yitzchak ben Avraham, then it says Avraham Hoyes Yitzchak. That's obviously double. If he's a son, and he gave birth to him, obviously. So Rashi says because Litzani Hadar Omrim Avimelech is Abra Sarah, because the Litzani Hadar, the jokesters of the generation, were saying that Avimelech was the one who is Yitzchak's father, right? Many years he stayed with Avram, which never got pregnant. What did Kadosh Baruch Hu do? So Yitzchak's face was identical to that of Avram's. Ve'ida kol Avram Molis Yitzchak. And everybody was able to testify that Avraham was one who gave birth to Yitzchak. Okay, Yitzchak ben Avram. There's testimony that Avram gave birth to Yitzchak. Okay, so it's a little bit. This Rashi is a bit schwer, obviously, because why do we care what the Tzani Adar said? Okay, fine. So you have that. Now let's go for a second through. Let's go through the life very quickly of Yitzchak Avinu. So Yitzchak Avinu, it is, if you look at it, so it says there's a famine, Ve'ira Baretz. It goes to Avimelech. Okay, so Avimelech, also, who else went to Avimelech? Avram went to Avimelech. Then Hashem tells him to stay in the land. Okay, then the people asked about his wife. And guess what Yitzchak did? Something very original. He said, Achosihi. He said, she's my sister. Sounds familiar. Okay, and then Avimelech doesn't take her, and he says, "Oh, how can you do this to me? She's your wife. How can you say she's my sister? Does that sound familiar?" Oh, yes, that's exactly what Avimelech said to Avram Avinu. And then Avimelech commands him, anybody touches them will die. It's the same thing he did. Okay, then all the wells that Shechafar Avdi Aviv, that Yitzchak's father's Avram's servants dug, the Plishtim closed them, and now Yitzchak opened them back up again. Okay, so he's redoing his father's work. So basically, and then it goes on to the story of Yitzchak giving the brachos to his children. So it's already going on to Yitzchak's children's stories, which is essentially moving on to Yaakov, as opposed to Yitzchak. So basically, if you read the accomplishments in the life of Yitzchak, as far as the Chumash describes it, it's almost funny how it's literally the exact same thing that Avraham did, and it's literally a repetition of Avraham Avinu's life. Not only that, we just saw that Yitzchak Avinu looked exactly like Avraham Avinu did. Okay, interesting. So it seems to be that we're hard pressed to understand what the uniqueness of Yitzchak's contribution was. It doesn't really seem to make sense because L'chera, he didn't do any. What was the special thing that he did? We know the Akedah was a tenth Nisayon of Avraham Avinu. It wasn't the Nisayon of Yitzchak Avinu. So what exactly was Yitzchak Avinu's contribution? So now, I want to further show, and we're going to get to a theme over here, that Yitzchak, we're going to see clearly that Yitzchak actually does not have his own identity, and we're going to explain what that means, and we're going to show what it means. So you have a Gemara in Brachos over here, and the Gemara in Brachos says, and this is talking about the famous idea that each of the three avos instituted, or misakin, one of the three tefillos. So it says that Yitzchak was the one, so Yitzchak was mitakin, he says Yitzchak made mincha, that's what we all know. So it says Tosfos has a question. He says, right? So there's a Gemara in Yuma that says that actually, you know whose tefillah it is when the walls get dark. In other words, when it's getting darker outside, you know whose tefillah that is? That's Avraham's tefillah. That's Tlusei da Avraham. So Tosfos is asking a question. He's saying, look, the Gemara says that Mincha was the tefillah of Yitzchak. But the Gemara in Yuma says that actually the tefillah Erev was the Tlusei da Avraham. So how can you say that the Tlusei da Avraham, the davening of Avraham, was from when the walls got dark? In other words, when it got dark outside, the one that's at night, that's, towards when it's getting darker, that's Yitzchak's tefillah, not Avram's tefillah. Okay, so you have that. And now, you also have, okay, so you have that. So we're going to see that kasha. Now, we have another interesting thing here, and this is a kasha that we asked last time, but hopefully we'll be able to answer it this week. And the kasha was, as you see in this Rashi here, that the word tzadi ches kuf, it's tzchok, which is what Yitzchak's name is essentially, except for the added yud, right? So tzadi ches kuf means all three shalosh chamuros. It means all three of the greatest sins that a person can do, and that rather than do them, he must give up his life. Okay, so our question was, how could that be that those three letters, the shorish of the name of Yitzchak, means those things? I mean, what does that mean to us about what Yitzchak was? That was our kasha. So now we're going to start the teretz. And when we start with the teretz, we're going to start off and we're going to talk about a pliastic yesod, a very, 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 very important, deep concept. And that is the concept of sacrifice, of what we would call carbon in the Torah, in terms of, meaning the idea of it, obviously a physical carbon. The question is, what is the true definition of sacrifice? We know that Yitzchak was a carbon, and we know that even though he wasn't shechted, the halacha is that once the carbon comes onto the mizbeach, it has the kedusha of a carbon. So the fact that Yitzchak wasn't actually shechted in the end doesn't make a difference. He was still a carbon. So Yitzchak was a carbon. The question is, So ideologically, what does that mean about a person? He's a carbon. What does that mean? What happened? So he wasn't actually killed, but it was still a carbon. And so, what does that mean that he was a carbon? That's the shadow. And therefore, on a more philosophical level, we want to know, what does it mean to sacrifice? What is the taich of that really? So what we have to understand is a concept that is brought down in my great great grandfather's Sefer Neumi Yitzchak Yaakov, and that is that there is an idea called Mesiras Nefesh. Now, when we think about the concept of Mesiras Nefesh, we think about that someone gives up they give up their soul, or they give up their effort, time, and money for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's Mesiras Nefesh. But actually, if we pay attention to the words, Mesiras Nefesh literally means Mesira. And if you learn Mesachas Bava Metzia, you know that Mesira does not mean giving up. Mesira actually means handing over. So it's a type of kinyan that can happen, that you're meiser. You're meiser to a shimer means you hand over something to a shimer. So Mesiras Nefesh does not mean giving up your soul. It means giving over your soul. Now, what does that mean, Mesiras Nefesh? So on a very simple level, on a much on a shallower level, it refers to physical sacrifices. You sacrifice for the sake of something. You sacrifice physically for it, and therefore you're giving up things. So it's a borrowed term when it refers to Mesiras Nefesh. But the real type of Mesiras Nefesh means the following thing, and this is where the Yesod starts. The real type of Mesiras Nefesh is that the truth of the fact of the way that the world runs is on two scales. There's two types of hashgacha of existence. There's an hashgacha pratis and an hashgacha klaus. And on a deeper level, what that really means is that God is being mashgiach. It means that he's paying attention, he's watching over. And now why would he do that? He would do that because there is a goal for the individual things that they need to get somewhere. And in order for them to get somewhere, they need to have hashgacha, providence, so that they get to the place that they're meant to get to. And this is the basic idea of schar va'onish. Schar va'onish gives relevance to your actions because God cares about what you do, because he wants you to go somewhere, he wants you to become, he wants you to actualize. That's on an individual level. Then there's hashgacha klalis. Hashgacha klalis means that the universe as a whole, humanity as an entity, also requires that it develop and go somewhere. Now, the idea of Mesiras Nefesh is the following thing. The idea of Mesiras Nefesh is that you have an individual who has undergone the process of completely being Meiser himself, handing over everything that he is to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to the Klal, which means when we think of Klal, we think of the assembly, but the idea of the assembly is it refers to the Hashgacha of the entirety of the Jewish people or of humanity, and that the individual person was Meiser himself for that sake. He completely gave up the reality of what he was for that sake. And we find a few people that did this, but my great grandfather is a sefer. He brings it down that Aaron HaKohen was an example of someone who did this. And what did Aaron HaKohen do? Aaron HaKohen built the golden calf, and the reason why he built the golden calf was because he said that there's a pasuk that he darshaned. He says that if a Navi and a Kohen are killed both on the same day, then Klal Yisrael does not have an opportunity to do teshuvah. So he said, it's better, this is Aaron's cheshbon, he said, it's better that I sin and that I get killed for my sin than that Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, the whole of Yisrael should kill me as well as Chur, because if they do, then they won't have the opportunity to do tshuva anymore. And so what Aaron did was the actual definition of Mesiras Nefesh, which is that he completely gave over not his physical body, not his life, his spiritual, his identity self, everything that he believed in, even though he knew it was wrong and he was a huge tzaddik and he didn't want to do it. Why did he do it? He did it, he completely wrecked, destroyed, gave over, and wiped out his individual sense of right and wrong and self and what he thought was good for the sake of the klal, which means for the idea that the klal of Yisrael should be able to last. And in that way, Aaron HaKohen, who was an individual at one point in time in history, is still known about today. There are very few people that we know about from 3,000-4,000 years ago. And those that we do know about inevitably went through this process. This is the process of becoming a concept by completely giving yourself over to mechanisms, to ideas that are the basis of the development of the world as a whole, of humanity as a whole. This is the taich of Mesiras Nefesh. Mesira means to give over, not give up, give over. What are you giving it over to? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does that mean? It means that you're allowing yourself and you are making yourself into a concept. You're letting yourself be stepped over, trotted over, and you're giving over your sense of right and wrong for the sake of the klal, so that the klal can last and go forward. This is the concept. Now, having this concept in mind, we now begin to understand what Yitzchak Avinu was. The word tzchok is Lashon Avodah Gilui Arayos Shvichas Damim. We know there's a famous Maharal. The Maharal says that each of the three chamuros is essentially one of the relationships that comprise the basic ability for a person to relate to the three different relationships that make up what a person is. And ben adam la'atzmo, ben adam la'chavero, and ben adam la'makom. And so much so important are these that if you violate them to the extreme of what they are, your existence is not worth living anymore. Because, and how do we see that? Because the Torah demands that you give up your life. So in other words, since the Torah says that you're supposed to give up your life rather than do them, why does the Torah say that? The Torah says that because doing it is the destruction of your life. So it's better to give up your life than do those things, because it ruins the entirety of what you are if you do one of those three chamuros. So therefore the Torah tells you, better for you to give up your life. So that's how we see that even one of those three things, if they're done, then the person has completely destroyed the reality of what he is. And therefore, the Torah says, give up your life. Now, we're saying that Yitzchak is all three. What would it mean that Yitzchak is all three? What it means that Yitzchak is all three is exactly what you think. It means that Yitzchak had no sense of an individual self at all. It's a pliastic azach, but it is the emes. And if you look at throughout the Chumash, you will see that this is the case. Yitzchak there was no individual. Yitzchak means all three shalosh chamuros. That's what the word means. What does it mean that it means that? It means that this person did not exist as an individual. Yitzchak existed entirely as a carbon. What does that mean? A carbon, a sacrifice to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It means that he was the embodiment of the midah of din and the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's existence in the world. That's what it means. And as we explained, that since Yitzchak took on this this need to appease the Midas Adin. And we spoke about last time that Midas Adin was something that was by definition external. It was something that was by definition external. It was in order so that other people can relate to it. Therefore, when Yitzchak becomes the korban for the sake of other people being able to realize the godless of Avraham Avinu and attach themselves to him and thereby to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, essentially Yitzchak becomes an expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world. Nothing else. Because his entire self was sanctified to be only an inyan of Kedusha for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does that mean, Kedusha for HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It means that through the reality of what happened to him, someone can relate to God, which is what we spoke about, the show aspect that we spoke about last week. So now what you have over here is a few different Makairos that will show you a raya and add a layer to this idea. And the result of this idea, by the way, is that really Yitzchak serves as a conduit between Avraham and Yaakov. And the reason for that is the following. The reality of Yitzchak was that he was everything that his father was, but he was not his father. So what does that do? What that does is it allows for the mechanism, okay, of identity building and solidification. What does that mean? What that means is the following thing. Avraham Avinu embodied certain midos. We know the pasuk says, "Hein b'kedoshav lo yamin," that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can never trust anyone while he's alive, because as long as you have bechira chafshis, as long as you have free will, you can always not do what you're doing. So the way that it works, what is the mechanism through which we have the idea that we have a bane, we have a child, and that child builds, which is baina, which is the shorish of the word bane, on us. That works through the idea that we have identity building. In other words, Avram was one concept. Now that concept gets incorporated into an overall identity structure. And then that gets built upon continuously throughout history until we finally get to the result of a complete identity of Yisrael, which can recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the mechanism which allows for and supports the structure of identity building is Yitzchak Avinu. And he does that through having no sense of his own self, but only being the embodiment of what Avraham Avinu was. So he was everything his father was, on top of the fact that his father was already that, which means that he actualized, he materialized, he made beautiful, like we spoke about last week, he made it into Midas Hadin, everything that his father was. He concretized it into an identity structure. And that identity structure was given over to Yitzchak, to Yaakov, rather. So, where do we see this? This comes out over here in a Pleiistic Medrash. It's really, really, really Pleiistic. It says, Avram Nikra Avraham. Okay, fine. So Avram is called Avraham. Then it's and you can't make this up. I'm just trying to explain it a little bit. Then it says Yitzchak Nikra Avraham. Wow. Did you know that? Yitzchak's name is Avraham. Poof. Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham. So it's darshaning it. So Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham. Meaning that Yitzchak is called Avraham. Okay, wow. So, I mean, if this is not everything that we're saying, I don't know what is. The Medrash just said that Yitzchak is called Avraham. That's mind-boggling. Yaakov Nikra Shmo Yisrael. Yaakov is called Yisrael. D'chsiv, Lo Yaakov Yirmeo Chimchak Yisrael. Yitzchak Nikra Shmo Yisrael. Whoa, Yitzchak, his name is also Yisrael. D'chsiv Ishmael Bnei Yisrael, Habai Mitzrayim Eis Yaakov. So it says that these are the names of the sons of Yisrael who came to Egypt, and it says Yaakov. So Yaakov was the son of Yisrael. So who's Yisrael? Yitzchak. And then Avraham Nikra Yisrael. Avraham Nikra Yisrael. Wow. So what does that mean? What does that mean that Avraham is Nikra Yisrael? What do we know? We know that Yisrael is Sar Kel, the officer of God. What is an officer? An officer is a representative. It's the external aspect of the reality of a situation, which means that all Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are all called Yisrael. Why is that? Because it's the combination of all three of them that creates the reality of the result of Yisrael, of Mitasei Shleima, in which the Jewish people become the Sar Kel. But Yitzchak is the connector between Avram and Yaakov. Why? Because Yitzchak was the one who built the idea through his sacrifice. He created the structure of identity building. He embodied everything that his father was. He repeated his life completely without any difference. And he did everything that his father did. Why is that? Why is that? Because Yitzchak was Avraham. What does that mean that Yitzchak was Avraham? It means that Yitzchak concretized the reality of Avraham Avinu's life and then was able to make it into an identity structure. An identity structure means that I can now approach this Yitzchak and I can say, I want to be part of the nation of Yitzchak, of Yisrael, and that automatically comes with everything that Avram Avinu is. How does it do that? It does that because Yitzchak sacrificed himself and he became solely the external aspect of the reality of Avraham Avinu. And an identity, the definition of an identity is that an identity is the outer part of the way that a person relates to the world around him, right? So if you ask someone what their identity is, what they are, they're always going to describe a position or a role in terms of the way that they relate to the world around them. So Yitzchak Avinu was the one who established the mechanism of an identity, which was completed by Yaakov, which we'll discuss later. But that is the Yisoid over here. That's what this Medrash is saying, which is a Pliya. And now let's go weiter, another raya. It says over here that Yaakov is talking to Lavan. He's saying, if it wouldn't, Lulei Elokei Avyi Elokei Avraham Ufachad Yitzchak Hayali. Right? So he said, if it wouldn't be for the God of Avram Avinu and the fear of Yitzchak, right? So Rashi says, Lo Rata Lomar Elokei Yitzchak. Yaakov didn't want to say the God of Yitzchak. Why? She'ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu miyachid shmo tzadikim b'chayeihem. Because God does not sanctify his name upon tzaddikim while they're still alive. Va'af al pi, and even though Shamar lo b'teisim Be'ersheva, God said to Yaakov when he left Be'ersheva, Ani Hashem Elokei Avraham Avicha ve'Elokei Yitzchak, right? So how could God say that he is the Elokim, right, of Yitzchak? L'char Yitzchak's still alive. So Rashi says, Bishvil shekahu heinav, because his eyes became blind, va'arehu kemes, and behold, he was dead. So Yitzchak was the only person who we find anywhere in the entire Tanakh that he was considered to be dead while he was alive, to the point that God was able to say that he was the Elokim of Yitzchak. What it means when you say Elokei Yitzchak is basically it's a concept. In other words, I am the God of Yitzchak. What does that mean, the God of Yitzchak? It means that Yitzchak and me have a relationship that is objective. It's part of the way that you can relate. In other words, Yaakov is saying it would be you say, I am the God of your father Yitzchak. What does that mean that I am the God of your father Yitzchak? It means that Yitzchak and God have a objective relationship that someone else can access now, which is what Yaakov is doing. That he was saying that it was through the help of the Elokei Avram and the Pachad Yitzchak. So that's another right to what we're saying, that Yitzchak Avinu was kemes while he was alive. Why was he kemes? Why was he dead? And we know that when did Yitzchak, according to the Medrash, when did Yitzchak's eyes become not seeable? He couldn't see through them. That was because the Malachim cried at him while he was in the Akedah. So according to this Rashi here in front of you, Yitzchak was kemes from when he was in the Akedah. And what that means is, the types that we're saying is that Yitzchak was kemes. What does it mean he was kemes? It means that he has none of his own identity. Zero. He is Avram Avinu, but he is the external aspect of Avram Avinu. He's the aspect of the identity, the aspect that is for show. In other words, that it is the aspect of Yisrael which automatically becomes part of who they are in terms of the way that they relate to the world around them, which is the Sar Kel, the officer of God. An officer is by definition a position of chashivus. Ki sarisa im Elokim v'tuchal chashivus, which means that chashivus comes from the word choshev, which means chashivus comes from that you are thought of, you're in people's machshava, so chashivus, and that is the Yitzchak's ability. And that's what he did. So that is the pshat over here. And in fact, we find something very fascinating, a fascinating Gemara in Shabbos, where it seems to be very counterintuitive, this Gemara. But with what we're saying, we're going to explain it. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan. What is it? He says, "My dechsev ki ata avinu ki Avram lo yadanu v'Yisrael lo yakiranu, ata Hashem avinu galinu be'olam shemecha." So what does this mean? That Klal Yisrael are saying Avram didn't recognize us and Yisrael didn't recognize us, and you Hashem are our Father, our Redeemer forever. So the Gemara says a story. La'asid lavo yomer la'akadosh baruch hu Avram. In the future, God will say to Avram, He'll say to him, "Banecha chatu li." Your children have sinned to me. Omer lefanav. So Avram is going to say to him, Yibon Shalom, Yimacha kedusha shemecha. Avram is going to say, God, if my children sinned, then wipe them out so that your name can become sanctified. They weren't in a relationship with you, they violated your Torah, let them be wiped out. So, Amar Lili Yaakov. So Amar, God said, Amar Lili Yaakov, let me ask Yaakov to have a tzar gidubanim, because Yaakov raised Klal Yisrael. After the Bay Rachmili, maybe he'll ask mercy for them. So God goes to Yaakov. He says, Amar Lei. He says to Yaakov, Banecha chatu. He says, Yaakov, your children sinned to me. Amar lefanav. Yaakov says before God, Yibon Shalom, Yimacha kedusha shemecha. Let them be wiped out on your holy name. So God says, God says, Lo b'savi taima, not in elders is their logic, Lo b'dardiki etza, not with young ones is their advice. So then he goes to who? He goes to Yitzchak. He says, Yitzchak. He says to Yitzchak, Yitzchak, Banecha chatu li, your children have sinned to me. Omer lefanav. So Yitzchak says before God, Yibon Shalom. He says, God, Banai v'lo banecha? What do you mean, Banecha chatuli? My children, not your children? B'shah shekdimu lefanecha nasa nishma. When they said nasa nishma, karasa lahem b'ni b'chari. You called them my firstborn son. Achshav banai v'lo banecha. Now you're calling them my sons, but not your sons. Ve'od. And furthermore, says Yitzchak, what's the big deal? Kama chatu. How much have they sinned? Kama shnosev shel adam. What are they? How much? Let's make a cheshbon. How many years does a person live? Shivim Shana. Okay, let's say 70. Dal Esrin Dil Anashalai. So you don't punish until they're 20. Fine. So 70 minus 20, that's Pashul Chamshin. You have 50 left. Dal Esrin V'Chamsha Dil Lefsa. Now you have 25 years that people sleep. So Pashul Esrin V'Chamshin. They have 25 left. Dal Tarti Streyu Falga. So now take off 12 and a half for davening, the saloye, umechal, eating, the besakise, and going to the bathroom. So Pashlu Tarti Streyu Falga. So how much time already can they sin? They're sinning for 12 and a half years. Imata Silva's Kulam Mutav. If you wanna handle the 12 and a half years of sin, fine. Vim Lav, and if not, Palge Alai, Falga Alecha. Let's split it. Half me, half you. V'intim Talemra Kulam Alai. And if you want to say, God, that they're all gonna come on me, Akarevas Nafshe Kamach. Yitzchak, I sacrificed my soul to you. So they'll all be on me. So the Gemara says, Poschin v'omer ki ata avinu. They open and they say, you are our father Yitzchak. So Omer lehem Yitzchak says to Klal Yisrael, Achan v'kasim li, before you praise me, kasul HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, you praise God. Yitzchak points to God with his eyes. Immediately the Jewish people point their eyes upwards to Hashem and they say, Ata Hashem Avinu Galinu Merlam Shemecha. You, Hashem Avinu, are our Redeemer from Ma'ilam. So this Gemara in Shabbos is a pleasing Gemara. Yitzchak was the Av of Din, the Karban. He says, he makes a whole cheshbon. He says, God, how much already did they sin? Oh, they're going to the bathroom half the time. They're sleeping half the time. They're davening half the time. What's the big deal? So what? You would think it'd be fakir. Yitzchak was the kadosh. Yitzchak was the one that did everything. He was the one that made himself a carbon. So you would think he would be the first one to say Yimacha Kedusha Shemecha. Elamai, what do we see over here? We see something very clear. That Yitzchak, the reality of Yitzchak was that he completely was b'midas hadin, which means that he was the reality of what his accomplishment was and what he did was that he became a complete show of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence in the world. And as we say show, it's the shir that we did last time. So I am there to understand what that means. But he's a complete show. And it's meduyik in this Gemara that Yitzchak, although obviously he's one of the Avos, in terms of this, they're saying to Yitzchak that you are our father, and then Yitzchak says to them, no, I'm not your father. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is your father. So what is Yitzchak saying? Yitzchak is saying exactly, this is exactly our vort, is that Yitzchak is not an Av in the sense that Yitzchak is an Av like Avram Avinu was an Av. Avram Avinu was an Av in terms of a specific contribution and specific concepts, and he had a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that was emotional and heartfelt, and it was completely, completely a from the inside. It was an emotional, real, from the inside type of relationship. And so did Yaakov. So when they heard that they sinned, they'll say, oh, how can it be that they sinned? They have to be wiped out. Why? Because that's how they related to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They were his lovers. They loved HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But Yitzchak wasn't pshat. He was the lover of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yitzchak was someone he himself became the expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself in the world. He himself became a carbon, which is what he says here. He says, even if you say Kulam Alai, I am you. I am part of you. I was makra by nefesh in front of you. So it's okay if they're all on me as well. So he's saying to the Jewish people are trying to say, oh, Yitzchak, our father, thank you. Then Yitzchak says, I'm not your father. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is your father. What does that mean? What's Yitzchak telling them? He's saying that, yes, I am your father, but I am your father through the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is your father. Because I am the expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because I was makriv myself, and therefore I'm the show of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name was miskadesh through me. And that is why Yitzchak is the one that looks at it this way, because Yitzchak is donning. Yitzchak is not judging based off the reality of the internal idea of how the Jewish people felt for them to be at the level that they sinned. He's donning on the identity level, the din level. How much of the way that they behaved impacted the world? How much chilul Hashem did they create? How much was it? Well, it couldn't have been that much because they're sleeping half the time. So what do you mean? So Avram Avinu didn't chop, they were sleeping half the time? No, but obviously Avram Avinu and Yaakov Avinu are saying that it's irrelevant how much the actual time was that they did the sin or not did the sin, because they're thinking about it in terms of a relationship. It doesn't matter if they slept half the time. If they slept, it doesn't. That's okay. So the point is that they didn't have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They sinned HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so they should be wiped out. But Yitzchak looks at it in the most practical, din-oriented. He says, how much chil Hashem did they make already? How much desecration of your name could they have done? It couldn't have been that much because they were sinning, because it's an external issue. It's a question of how much, when people saw those Jewish people and when their behavior, how much did it impact the world around them negatively? It couldn't have been factually that much because they couldn't have spent that much time doing it because they were busy with these other things, and that's what Yitzchak is saying. So it's a pleiistic Gemara in Shabbos that's saying that everything that we're saying, but more. And it's just amazing that this is the pshat of what's going on over here with Yitzchak Avinu, and it answers so many questions, because the Metzius of the way that he describes Yitzchak over here, it's almost a joke. It's mamish exactly a repetition of Avraham Avinu's life. If you look at it, you think that Yitzchak has, and he doesn't, Tamaisa, have any sense of individuality to the Metzius of what he is. The entire parsha that starts off talking about him talks about his toldos, and then his main accomplishment was the 10th son of Avraham Avinu. But Elamai, it's exactly what we're saying, that Yitzchak's whole etzem, the whole reality of Yitzchak is that he's meant to be a conduit. He is meant to be an individual who creates the ability to transfer building of self, of identity structures, chesed, monotheism, and give that over into an identity structure so that can be taken on by other people so that they can start off where the previous person left off. So that throughout history, whenever the Jewish people at any certain time, they give up their Meiser Nefesh for something, that gets imbued into the Jewish identity. And then we can build off that Mesiras Nefesh that they had. And the Gemara says that for Bris Milah, the reason why Bris Milah is such a prevalent thing and that all the Jewish people do Bris Milah nowadays is because Masru Nashim Alayu. And in the times of where it was difficult, the Jewish people are always Meiser Nefesh for Bris Milah. So they do it now also. But by Tefillin, they weren't Meiser Nefesh, and therefore now also Tefillin is very weak in Klal Yisrael. So you see this mechanism. Meiser Nefesh Alayu means it became part of the overall identity, the klal identity of Israel, which every person, every yid taps into automatically as a Jewish person. The way that works scientifically is a very fascinating subject. It could be that it's even biological, but it's a discussion for another time. And just to finish off, the parsha of Yitzchak Avinu also offers us the taich of Givura. We know that there's a very famous Mishnah in Avos that says, Ezehu Gibor HaKayevish Yitzray. It says, who is a Gibor? That is a person who can conquer his Yetzer Hara. And everybody learns that Pshat in the Mishnah is that it's saying something that's not, it's not literal. The only thing is, it's even harder to become Sheitzahara than to be a real Gibor, right? And my problem with that always was that Shkoyach, it's very nice that it's harder, but what Ezehu doesn't mean which one is harder. Ezehu means what is a Gibor, which means that I want to know, what is a Gibor? Is a Gibor someone who's strong in battle, or is a Gibor the idea of Ezehu, Gibor, is not pshat, oh, that since it's harder for me to be kavish my yetzer, so therefore that means that that's better than someone who's a gibor in the conventional terms. Then it should have said Ezehu adif mi gibor, or Ezehu yoser taiv mi gibor. It doesn't say that. It says Ezehu gibor. It says what is the nature of a true gibor, and that is someone who's kavish his yetzer. So I always said pshat, and this is the true taich of being mighty, which we also know. Messiah was the midah of Yitzchak, and he was mighty. And I always said the pshat in the Mishnah, and the pshat in general is the following thing. And I said this is pshat by Yehuda, and it's pshat by Gvura in general. What does it mean to be a gibor? What does it mean to be mighty? What it means is the following thing. As we were discussing this entire time, there are always two operating mechanisms that go on within a human being. There is the essential self, the essence, the potential, and then there is the developmental aspect, the identity aspect, the aspect that is meant to be as a structure of relationship to the things around it, which is called an identity. And the idea of Yetzer, of Kavish Yetzirah, is the idea that a person is always existing with an awareness of the demand of himself to become more, to become better, to become more than he is at the time for the sake of din, which we explained last time was the demand that a person actualizes. And this can be bought out by being kavish yitzray, because as is well known, yitzray refers to short-term benefit. Yitzhahara is, it comes out in our physical expressions of short-term benefit or short-term release, right? You get angry, and so you want to release. You need to release the anger, so you lash out at someone, or you have taiva, so you indulge. It's all short-term, and short-term versus long-term. What does it mean? The concept of short-term benefit delay for the sake of long-term development is this exact thing. It's the aside of din. It's the aside of gevura, which means that the person is aware of the reality of his need to become more at every single time. And I actually did research on this, and it comes out that if a person has the understanding of gevura, which is that his entirety needs to be devoted to becoming better all the time. He always needs to be going forward and developing and becoming better and better and better all the time. He is actually more capable and stronger than someone who is not. And this means this gevura is referring to even literal gevura. He's more gibor. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, it's in the famous example where you have a mother who picks up the car off her children. Which means what? Which means that although it is a myth that people use only 10% of their brain power, it is true that on the whole, people do not use the entirety of their abilities, of their potential at any given time. And the reason for that is because there is a lack of awareness and a lack of urgency for them to do what they're doing, because they don't have this yesod of gevura and the need and the understanding that they have to actualize, and that it's about what they need to be contributing to the world around them. And therefore, they don't care enough to draw upon more than they need just to get by. And my biggest driver for this is that we know in the times of Tanakh that the biggest gibarim, the biggest people who are the mightiest physically, were also the biggest Talmidei Chachamim. This is true of David. This is true of Eov. This is true of Yoav ben Tzeruya. This is true of all of the people. You look throughout Tanakh, the people who were strongest physically were also the biggest Talmidei Chachamim, and that is because their learning of Torah allowed them to understand and draw upon the entirety of what they were at every given moment. So imagine that you live your life in a way that when you approach something, you're always approaching it as if everything is contingent upon what you're doing now, as if you're running away from a gun, as if someone is about to kill you if you don't do it. And that's how you approach it. You draw upon everything at every given time. And that is the aside of Gevura, and that's why they were able to be so strong. And this is, I mean, people always wonder why the median average Jewish male makes so much more than the guy, and it's in the answer is so obvious, and it's totally on this as well. People will only push themselves as far as they need to. So if a person is starting a family and he has missions and goals for the world and he cares about the world and he cares about contributing and he cares about Midas Hadin and he cares about the Hashgacha Klalis, he wants the world to come to its completion and for it to be better, then he has the drive to accumulate more resources than he needs, which is why he would have wealth. But if he doesn't, then he won't. And therefore, if you live in an American society of decadence and of comfort being synonymous with pleasure, then what it comes out is that you just don't make as much because you don't have the drive to make it more than you need. So once you have what you need, so a person is made from dust, from the earth, which is by its nature non-moving. So people in their very nature are lazy. So why would you get more than you need? But if you're a gibor, if you're someone who's a gibor, then you will have more than you need and you will accumulate wealth because you're motivated to change the world, to accumulate resources for the sake of doing for more than just yourself.